Hello, here's what's coming up on The World Today. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken backs ECOWAS effort over Niger coup. Plus, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, says at least 435 children killed so far in Sudan conflict, with over 2,000 others injured. Welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. We begin with Russia's Wagner mercenary group taking advantage of instability in Niger. This is according to U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Mr. Blinken said he did not think Russia or Wagner instigated Niger's coup. However, the U.S. is worried about the group possibly manifesting itself in parts of the Sahel region. The country has been ruled by a junta following the ousting of President Mahmoud Bazoum nearly 2 weeks ago. There have been suggestions the coup leaders have asked for help from Wagner, which is known to be present in neighboring Mali. Meanwhile, the United States State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller says U.S. aid programs to the government of Niger that have been paused over a military takeover in the country are valued at more than $100 million. Speaking at a press briefing, Mr. Miller said hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. assistance is at stake if the country's junta does not reinstate the elected government.
The Secretary announced on Friday also that we are pausing assistance to the government for the time being. That assistance will affect development aid to the government, security aid to the government. It's a significant amount. I don't have a number because it's a pause, and it's a pause that we would hope would be reversed if the junta leaders would step aside and restore constitutional order tomorrow. That pause would be the pause would go away and security assistance would be reinstated. But as we've made clear, hundreds of millions of dollars are at stake. Again, it is a number over $100 million, but it's hard to give an exact amount because, one, we just made this pause.
How much you're giving to Niger?
We don't know how long this pause will be in effect. If the pause,
no matter how long it's going
no,
to be.
Announce
something like this, you should have an idea of what it is that you're.
Here's the reason.
Stopping,
sometimes there are payments that are made in one big lump sum. Sometimes there are continuing payments that go on once every. I'm not going to say a period, but and so
the program's paused, but certainly
over $100 million. I don't have a list of specific programs, but they are development assistance, security assistance, law enforcement assistance, and other programs that aid the government of Niger.
Niger's military junta leader, Gen Abdourahmane Chiani, has named a former finance minister as the new prime minister following the July 26th coup. Ali Mohamed Liane Zine replaces Mahamadou Ouhamadou, who was in Europe during the coup. Mr. Zine, reported to be in his 50s, served as cabinet director and finance minister from 2001 until the overthrow of the late former president, Mahamadou Tanja, by the army in 2010. Mrs. Zain, whose new position was announced by the junta spokesperson and the state-owned television station, has worked for the African Development Bank in Chad, Ivory Coast and Gabon in recent years. Meanwhile, other military appointments were also announced. And delegations from Mali and Burkina Faso's military governments have assured Niger's military coup leaders of their full support in a solidarity visit to General Chiani in Niamey, the country's capital. This comes as the regional bloc ECOWAS is set to hold a summit to discuss the next move against Niger's junta. An ECOWAS deadline to reinstate President Mohamed Bazoum was ignored by military leaders, and he's still being held captive. They remained defiant in the face of sanctions and threats from ECOWAS, including a military intervention that the bloc said would be a last option. Mali's military government spokesperson Abdoulaye Maïga described the ECOWAS sanctions on Niger as illegal and illegitimate. Meanwhile, residents in Niger's capital have welcomed the arrival of military delegates from Mali and Burkina Faso in hopes that troops from the region's other junta-led states could help protect the leaders of Niger's recent coup from a potential show of force from other West African nations. Asked about the visit of the delegations, Niamey resident Abdulaziz Mahamain said in his words, "I think it will help us fight terrorism more effectively and pool our forces." Another resident believes it's common sense to join forces in the face of danger, and the best solution for Niger is for Mali, Burkina Faso, and all those concerned to put their hands together to eradicate the scourge. Mali and Burkina Faso military leaders last week warned against ECOWAS military intervention in Niger. And UN aid agencies in coup-hit Niger are scrambling to make contingency plans to eke out depleting stocks of food, medicines and fuel, even as sanctions threaten to increase the number of people in need. The UN humanitarian chief in Niger is warning that over 4 million people are already targeted for UN emergency assistance in the West African country before the July 26 power grab led to border airspace closures, squeezing vital humanitarian supplies. UN resident and humanitarian coordinator there, Louise Aubin, said flights operated within Niger by the United Nations Humanitarian Air Service to supply its far-flung regions had been disrupted but not suspended by the junta's decision to close its airspace. Well, let's talk some more about the situation in Niger. Joining me now, African Affairs analyst, Mr. Yinka Oyeniji. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
Let's begin with your thoughts on what appears to be an alliance we're seeing from the governments, military governments in Mali and Burkina Faso. Both countries, sending their delegation to Niger in the wake of the expiration of the ECOWAS deadline. What do you think is happening there?
All right, so yeah, it's pretty apparent that this is establishing alliances. Everybody needs friends at this time. Nobody needs enemies. So what you have seen are tactical maneuvers by countries occupied by the military in Africa who are forming alliances to probably put up a voice that good governance or leadership can also be provided by the boys in the military. So it's hardly surprising, as much as we have the ECOWAS also trying to come out forcefully to denounce what is happening in Niger. And then, of course, we have sanctions against the junta by ECOWAS and then, of course, the West. So it presupposes, it stands without reason. I mean, there's no gainsaying the fact that those countries that have military rulers at this point will come together to exert their own force and then try to eke out legitimacy for their government. So you expect that whatever is happening in Niger, there may be some kind of move to replicate the same direction for other countries on the belt that are still being occupied by military at this moment. So it's a show of force, and it's an attempt to create alliances for some kind of convergence against the necessary opposition to this coup that we have in pockets of African countries.
We've also heard that delegates from, ECOWAS, the AU, and also the US, they've tried, to get to speak to the junta in Niger, but they've been refused entry. And Niger, the junta has cited perhaps fear of attack from the people. Do you think that that is a real threat? And this is all as, people are hoping that they are open to diplomacy in this regard.
Well, I'll say to you that the fact that ECOWAS and a few African presidents of African countries or leaders and also of the West came out immediately after the coup to denounce it is good on paper, but it was never going to achieve anything other than what we have at the moment. Okay, we slept. That there's no gain overstating that fact. Okay, the reason why the military will still continue to have incursion into politics in parts of the world is because of the tacit admission that civilian rule has failed. So we have presidents in office that have not brought about any meaningful development to their nations, and they are just sitting there. Some of them sit-tight leaders. And there's some form of impetus or catalyst for the military to say we can do a better job of governance than the civilians. So we have, even the civilian presidents don't have any form of legitimacy to denounce what is happening in Niger. I just followed your news broadcast at the moment, and I saw bad roads, lack of infrastructure, a dearth of infrastructure. So there's no legitimacy for any civilian president in Africa, so to speak, to come out and denounce what is happening in Niger. So it was some kind of legitimacy only on paper to say we denounce this, but we don't really have the impetus to say that we are going to move the military boys out of. They weren't going. That won't happen immediately. There will still be some transition to military. We'll still call in diplomatic efforts, but that won't achieve any result at this time. It's still premature.
See them surviving. They appear to have the people's backing, talking about Niger and the junta now, and then they're getting support from Mali, and then there's Burkina Faso. But we're having the U.S. saying that they are withdrawing some aids. Airspace have been shot, ECOWAS countries. So, I mean, they are bleeding to an extent. How do they plan to survive?
Well, at this moment, I think it is still too early to determine how this will go. We can do it the same way we've been doing it again and again to say, oh, there will be a full outbreak of war in the country. Oh, the citizens will then starve and all of that. We cannot say at this point that will be the result. Because, look, the citizens have welcomed this coup. They've welcomed the military into governance. So we can't say at this point that, oh, there is going to be a grade of a repercussion or that there will be negative consequences of what has happened. It's still early days to point that out. One thing is clear and is for sure that at some point everybody will take a seat at the table and then we'll determine how humanitarian efforts and some of those aids can be released. In any case, why are we as African countries blessed with so many resources, still going cap in hand, seeking aid from so-called first-class countries who are possibly just pilfering our resources on the continent? So at this point, we can't tell. The rights of the people, the welfare of the people will always be paramount. And as long as the people are not protesting or going out in arms against the government, it still looks good for them as citizens at the moment. We won't shut down Niger because they have military. What we can do is try to coerce the military boys to leave government, but we can't do that with civilian casualty. That would not be the necessary next step. So as much as possible, diplomatic channels will be reopened, and then we'll see how the welfare of the people will be paramount. But the people are not protesting against this military rule, and that should send signals to everybody, including those giving the aid.
Indeed. We've also seen a lot of anti-France sentiment. Many people wonder if this perhaps is an end to, good relations with the West. But then, seeing as members of the ECOWAS bloc are meeting on Thursday, what do you see them doing next?
I see them making many more pronouncements. But once you shift sanctions as the first level and it's not bearing any fruit, then what you then do is in one breath, so it's a carrot and stick approach. In one breath, you start throwing a lot of forceful words out there, okay, trying to intimidate and harass, but I don't see it achieving any result. We need elder statesmen on the continent. I mean, people like Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria, former president. We need people like that still have some measure of respect on the continent to intervene. Olusegun Obasanjo himself was a military ruler in Nigeria before he enjoyed 2 civilian terms in office. So what we require at this moment is for us to look for solutions by ourselves on the belt for the problems that we are facing. Nobody wants to go to war in Africa, and then nobody is looking at large-scale casualty of civilians. So at this stage, what we need is to explore diplomacy to solve the problem, and that's an advice for leaders in Africa, including serving our former presidents. That's the only solution I see in this.
African Affairs Analyst Yinka Oyeniyi, many thanks. We will continue to watch the events develop. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you too for having me.
We're in Sudan now, where the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, says at least 435 children have been killed so far in the conflict, with over 2,000 others injured. According to Ted Chaban, the Deputy Executive Director, Humanitarian Action and Supply Operations, UNICEF, the young ones have consistently borne the brunt of recurring violence, upheaval and displacement. He stressed that the situation they're facing is unprecedented and things have never been this difficult. For the next 100 days, UNICEF says it will need $400 million urgently to sustain and scale the crisis response.
Children have consistently borne the brunt of recurring violence, upheaval, and displacement, and this is the case again. But I also want to say there's no exaggeration that the situation that they're facing today is unprecedented. However difficult things have been in the past, it's never been this difficult. Before the war erupted on the 15th of April, Sudan was already grappling with the humanitarian crisis. Now, more than 110 days of brutal fighting have turned the crisis into a catastrophe, threatening the lives and futures of a generation of children and young people who make up over 70% of the population. From what's reported, 435 children have been killed in the conflict, at least 2,025 children injured. That's an average of 1 child killed or injured every hour since the war began. And we know that that's an underestimate. The true toll is much, much higher.
93 humanitarian partners reached at least 2.5 million people with some sort of life-saving assistance across Sudan between April and June. Let's not forget the target is 24 million people. 24 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, of which the target is 18 million. 24 million people is half the population of a country that before 15th of April was doing not too bad. There were needs, but we were not targeting people in the capital. The accounts from people are saying that certain tribes were targeted more than others. And here, I think the focus right now in this briefing is on how do we get assistance into the different areas, Khartoum, Wad Medani, Port Sudan, to a lesser extent, the Kordofans, and how do we stay and deliver no matter what.
Meanwhile, United Nations spokesperson Farhan Haq has been updating reporters about the humanitarian operations in Sudan. He says the first humanitarian convoy since the start of the ongoing conflict there has arrived in East Darfur after 9 days on the road.
Since the start of the conflict. On Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that last week, the first humanitarian convoy to reach East Darfur since the start of the conflict arrived in the state after 9 days on the road. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs negotiated the movement of these trucks from White Nile to El Dain, the capital of East Darfur. The convoy delivered 430 tons of agricultural seeds provided by the Food and Agriculture Organization to be distributed to farmers across the state by the Ministry of Agriculture. Further humanitarian access is urgently required so that all agricultural areas in Darfur can benefit from the provision of seeds. All parties must also provide farmers access to agricultural lands and ensure their protection as they plant and harvest their crops. A failed agricultural season would have further devastating consequences on all communities in Darfur.
Welcome back. This week, delegates arriving at Bellem's International Airport are being welcomed with a lively Boy de Mascara folkloric dance routine. In fact, the whole city is celebrating being in the spotlight, playing host to the Amazon Summit. It also feels like a bit of a warm-up for 2025 when the city will host COP30. These two events are a big deal for this part of Brazil, a region that often feels forgotten. Belém is well placed too as the capital of Pará, the state with the highest deforestation rate in Brazil. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva called the summit to bring together the 8 South American countries who share a slice of the Amazon. It's the first time in 45 years that there has been a meeting like this, ensuring a regional response to combat crime and deforestation as well as climate change. If medieval advances in the plough didn't lift Europe's peasants out of poverty, it was largely because their rulers took the wealth generated by the new gains in output and used it to build cathedrals instead. Economists say something similar could happen with artificial intelligence if it enters our lives in such a way that the touted benefits are enjoyed by the few rather than the many. Simon Johnson, professor of global economics and management at MIT Sloan School of Management, says every technology advancement has a varying effect on humanity, but says the risks and benefits tend to repeat.
About big technological transformations. Of course, every time is different. Every technology is different. The point of impact, the way it affects jobs, the way it affects opportunities for companies, that's different. But we know from repeated experiences that you're going to, how the pattern is going to play out, what sort of opportunity is going to be presented, and also what the kind of risks are. AI definitely has the potential to increase inequality. It may benefit other people also, but that could also take a really long time. So a lot of times technological transformations eventually do help a lot of people, but eventually might be 100 years or even more. So I think the question with AI is how quickly can you share the benefits? I think the biggest leap was the Industrial Revolution. The coming of the factory, moving people from agriculture to cities. Of course, that was also a lot slower. So if you look at what happened in Britain, which was by far the pioneer on industrial technology, it's about 100 years for that technology to really come to fruition and to have a really big impact on the broader economy. So AI is up there in terms of potential impact, but it's also really fast. Right? It's coming at us much faster than electricity did. For example, that was a big deal in the early 20th century, but that took about 20 or 30 years to roll out fully. AI already, I mean, within a few days, ChatGPT was affecting jobs around the world. And I think within 5 years, the effects are going to be quite profound in many places.
And scouts at the troubled World Scout Jamboree in South Korea, they're vowing to stay resilient as thousands of teenage participants started evacuating to safer areas due to an expected typhoon. The evacuation is the latest blow to the 10-day Jamboree after hundreds fell ill due to a heat wave and amid mounting complaints from parents over its organization. So, and its surrounding province of Gyeonggi will now host more than 16,000 scouts, with others fanning out to 6 other areas that are also not expected to be in the path of the typhoon. At least 2 people have died as a powerful storm ripped through eastern U.S., with thousands of flights canceled. Nearly 1 million homes and businesses from New York to Alabama lost power. Over 15 million people were under tornado and thunderstorm watches. Power had still not been restored for almost 250,000 homes, and over 1,000 flights have been delayed. Meanwhile, in Seattle, a study shows the state is still unprepared for extreme heat, with the elderly most vulnerable.
When the weather is really, really hot and I start teaching exercise, I don't teach at a high intensity. I keep it very low because, again, it gets very hot, and that's dangerous. They can pass out from that. You got to be careful of heat exhausting schedules, so I make sure they try and get their water in periodically. Even when I give them breaks, go get water. And make sure that when I give them the breaks, I get them to walk around slowly. That's very important. Have not to stop cold, but to walk around.
I have lived in the Seattle area for about 50 years. And when I first moved here, the weather conditions were a little bit different. I did not experience the heat that we're having right now. And so right now, like up there, I have an air conditioner that I bought last year. It's portable air conditioner that I put in my house. And also, like we're using fans, and I also have a cooler.
When we think about the elderly as a category of people who are vulnerable by definition, people over 65 are at greater risk. A lot of reasons, that are just biophysical, like your body is less efficient at sweating and cooling itself down, right? But you also have those pre-existing medical conditions at higher rates, heart disease or kidney disease. You may be on those medications that reduce your ability to sweat. So you're just more vulnerable across the board. Because some of these folks are living in their homes by themselves, kind of off the grid with no one to talk to and no one looking after them. And we have to find a way to reach them. And that might be more like one of those volunteer programs like the New York City Be a Buddy program, where you know that there's somebody living in that house that no one's checking on, but it's my job to go check on them. Some of those folks are living together in a facility, like a 55-plus living facility or an assisted living facility, in which case retrofitting those facilities to make sure that they don't experience that heat could be a huge way to protect a concentrated group of vulnerable older adults by making some basic infrastructure upgrades to those older buildings, right?
A couple of summers ago, when it got 104, I think one day.
107.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was wonderful to come.
It was hot, and we live in a brick house, so it was really hot. So all of our plants we put in the basement, and kind of put it in lots of water in the tubs. And anyway, they survived, but it was horrible. I almost thought about moving away from Seattle. It was just too hot.
Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Bird joins me now for more. Hi, Maria. Talk to us. First, how are you coping with the weather where you are?
Well, I am thankful that I have electricity today. It was quite a horrific storm yesterday. We typically in the Washington, D.C. area do not have tornadoes, but we did have tornado watches. We had to shelter in place most of the evening due to the extreme weather conditions. So this is a day that many people are recovering, lots of trees down, power lines down, and this is a day that people are really looking to see what kind of damage has occurred as a result of these storms. So we know that climate change is having a major impact throughout the world, and right here in the U.S. between extreme heat on the southwest regions of the country, and also much of California is experiencing extreme heat, and then on the East Coast, tornadoes and these extreme thunderstorm weather conditions.
So essentially, extremes that, some are battling storms and then others extreme heat. I mean, when people talk about what they're going through, I'm sure this is also affecting transportation and a lot of other sectors.
Correct. Transportation, especially airline transportation, flying through the airports has been quite a challenge most of this summer, not only due to some of the challenges that I've experienced through the scheduling of the airlines, but now the weather. And so this has made a dramatic impact on travelers. This is a very busy time of the year in the U.S. People traveling for vacation. August is one of the most traveled times of year as families are preparing to go back to school, so they're getting their last bit of vacation in. So this is not the time that people want to see major weather conditions that are putting delays on airports. And obviously those who are driving through these torrential storms, they are at great risk as well.
How is government helping out? And this is for those who perhaps sleep on the streets, and then families at, the different ends of the extreme weather conditions.
Well, unfortunately, some of these extreme weather conditions, why tornadoes are so dangerous, can oftentimes take out entire communities, which takes homes down, which means people are then without housing for a significant period of time. So the government is putting in place temporary and emergency housing facilities for individuals or families that have lost their homes as a result of the storms. Also, some states have state of emergencies depending on how bad the storm was. We know that flooding has been a major issue in the United States. So those are some of the measures that the U.S. Government is putting in place, and obviously bringing forth Red Cross and other emergency personnel that can assist with health needs and any other sort of evacuation or safety and security measures.
So when we look at the temperatures, are we looking at areas that are hotter than record, colder than, record time? Are we looking at this, impact of climate change? Would we say things are worse now than they were in the past?
Yes, these extreme temperatures, I mean, even though Texas has been known to be a hotter state, when you're talking about consecutive days of over 100, 105, even sometimes almost 110 degrees, those are extreme heat conditions.
Fahrenheit.
When you talk about desert areas that have the cacti is even not surviving through some of the extreme heat, that goes to show you that we are in different times. And in the eastern region, we're expecting we'll begin to see a cool down a lot sooner. August is normally a hot month, but we're expecting that it could potentially start to cool down a little bit sooner. So these are some of the real impacts of climate change that are obviously impacting Americans and the daily lives of the people that live here.
Maria, thank you, and do stay safe. The Australian Space Agency has identified the streak of light that lit up Melbourne's sky on Monday night as the probable remains of a Russian rocket. Video footage shot right before midnight showed long streaks of light crossing the Australian night sky. In statements posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, the ASA said the streaks were likely the remnants of a Russian Soyuz 2 rocket re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and were bound for the ocean off the southeastern coast of Tasmania state. The ASA added that they would continue to monitor the outcome of the debris re-entering Australia's atmosphere in cooperation with government partners. Well, still keeping fit while in space, the China Manned Space Agency on Tuesday released footage showing the Shenzhou 16 mission crew doing exercises in the space station. The video is released to mark China's 15th National Fitness Day, launched in 2009 to promote extensive public fitness programs and raise the people's enthusiasm to keep fit. In the footage, the three astronauts, Jing Haipeng, Zhu Yangzhu, and Gui Hachao, were exercising in the space station, as you can see, using different equipment. China launched the Shenzhou 16 manned spacecraft on May 30th, sending the three astronauts to the Tiangong space station for a 5-month mission. The mission crew completed their first spacewalk on July the 20th. Wherever you are, try to keep fit. Thanks for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Bye for now.